Nebraska has a new defensive coordinator, and its staff is starting to take shape. We discuss coming up.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts in on YouTube, or if it's not even in the morning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We'll start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Head to FanDuel.com to get started.
All right, welcome in. I am Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone. He is right there alongside me. It is Tuesday afternoon, and Connor, there is a reason. There is some reason in the universe why we had technical failures this morning, and our show that was originally scheduled to post on Tuesday has now been sent out into the universe. I don't know if it'll ever see the light of day. Big breaking news on Tuesday afternoon out of Lincoln. John Butler is the defensive coordinator of the Nebraska Cornhuskers. It is permanent. Well, someday he won't be the defensive coordinator of the Nebraska football team, but he is right now, and he will be for the bowl game, and he will be in the 2025 season. And Nebraska is getting close to making a pair of additional hires on the defensive side. Phil Snow, who was Matt Rhule's longtime defensive coordinator while at Baylor, while with the Carolina Panthers. 68-year-old Phil Snow set to join the team. They are working toward that as associate head coach. And then you have Terry Bradden, who is in his mid-30s, last 8 seasons with the Kansas City Chiefs. He is set to become, if this works out, it's trending in this direction, according to a highly placed team source, to become the Nebraska defensive line coach. So this is it. Nebraska's got its coaching staff. How about that? December 10th.
Well, I think people were, I don't know if they were on edge about this. It was, anybody had asked me over the last couple of weeks, they were like, well, what do you think they're going to do? You know, what are they doing? The first one was the defensive coordinator. And I told them every time, I said, I think they're going to elevate Butler. I think they're going to hire Butler. And, you know, that's sort of the way it turned out. As far as the timing of it, I think you have to sort of like, you have to piece it all. It's a big puzzle. It's not just one piece, move it there, and then you build around that. Like, no, it's a big puzzle and a lot to fit together. And I think, you know, Phil Snow factors into that equation a little bit as well. So I think he's thinking about the big picture. And frankly, what was the rush? You know, so Nebraska doesn't play a bowl game for more than 2 weeks now, and that whole thing is, you know, who's going to be on the roster and who's going to be doing what is totally in flux, and it was going to be no matter what. So it's an interesting move, but not a particularly surprising one to me.
Do you think it's coincidental that the staff came together on the day after the transfer portal opened?
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
So while there wasn't a rush as far as getting the pieces together in order to coach a football game, I do think there was a rush and there was some urgency. And this is confirmation of that. There was a rush to do this in time to have coaches in place when portal prospects are visiting Nebraska here in the mid portion of December, that they will be able to speak with their position coaches, that they will be able to speak with their coordinators. Let's just reset this. Since the end of the regular season, Tony White and Terrence Knighton have left to go to Florida State. Garrett McGuire has left to go to Texas Tech. Nebraska elevated Dana Holgorsen from an interim offensive coordinator to permanent offensive coordinator and hired Da'Keel Shorts, his former receiver and receivers coach from Kentucky, to be the Nebraska receivers coach. Now on the defensive side, you've got John Butler elevated once from secondary coach to interim DC, now to permanent DC. Phil Snow brought in from the outside, and Terry Bradden brought in from the NFL. This is a lot of stuff that's happened since Black Friday or the Monday after Black Friday.
Yeah, it is. It's a big turnover. And I think, you know, especially when you think about the defensive staff, who, you know, with Tony White, with with Pot Roast, Terrence Knighton, and then even Evan Cooper, who wasn't with Nebraska this past year.
Yeah,
He's
I
off
forgot
to
about
Florida
Phil
State.
Simpson. He was brought in too.
Phil Simpson is another name, and we put him on the side there too. So like, yeah, it's a big turnover, and so there was just a big glaring hole on that defensive side of the ball, and to go along with the coaches, I mean, they've lost some key parts of their defense too, or some parts of their defense anyway. So Nebraska has to figure out a way to kind of build that thing back. They both need long-term guys that they could have on their roster in 25, 26, 27. But also they need immediate impact guys as well. And it's hard to do that if they're committing to a place where they don't know who the defensive coordinator is going to be. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And now you could kind of see the vision. You could see how Matt Rhule sets it up on both sides of the ball. It's definitely different than it was before. There's no doubt about that.
So I'm interested, and we'll learn this in the coming days. Matt Rhule is going to speak to the media on Thursday, and he'll have some things to say about the way that this defensive staff is going to be structured. But it would seem, because there isn't a secondary coach outside of John Butler, that he'll do the majority of the work with the secondary while coordinating the defense. Now, I would expect that they're going to have somebody else there. Like he'll have a safeties coach or a corners coach or an assistant secondary coach, something of that nature. You have two coaches to work with the linebackers in Rob Dvoracek and the aforementioned Phil Simpson, who was at Nebraska in 2023 and then spent the 2024 season at Florida State as an analyst. And then you have Bradden to work with the players up front. Like, so does this lend itself to a 3-3-5? Does it lend itself to something that's more multiple? Nebraska was pretty multiple over the last two seasons with Tony White. Could they be going to a 4-3 or a 3-4? I wondered about the 3-4 when I saw Simpson come in as the outside linebackers coach, because Nebraska has just one outside linebacker in its 3-3-5 setup. So I think we're going to get a sense here in the near future of what kind of a scheme Nebraska wants to run. And I don't know if it's as simple as saying, well, the last time we heard from Matt Rhule about this, he said he loved the 3-3-5 and didn't want to change from that. I think there's going to be some change, but will it be significant enough to change the name of the base scheme? I don't know.
I wonder what Phil Snow's impact here is going to be. It's it's something that we could discuss in further depth as we go on throughout the show here. But like, I'm just, because if you can't tell, this is sort of off the riff. We just kind of got this a little while ago and decided to show up for a pod.
We want to bring you the reaction.
Yeah, we want to bring you the reaction. So I'm thinking like, all right, Phil Snow is a longtime trusted Rhule, kind of a right-hand man. He's been with him at every stop. John Butler just came here last year. John Butler's the guy with the defensive coordinator tag on him. Phil Snow is the associate head coach. We know that the offense is Dana Holgerson's, right? Yeah. So yeah. What does that make the defense? It's Rhule, it's Snow, it's Butler. It'll be interesting to see what that kind of feels like.
I think something that happened in the past few days, and this could have been the reason that we didn't hear an announcement like this on signing day, is everybody had to get comfortable with this arrangement. Phil Snow had to be comfortable with the arrangement. He's not coming in here to be a recruiter. It's like a mentoring kind of role. I think he's going to be there for Matt Rhule. I think he's going to be there for John Butler. I think he could potentially be there to help Holgorsen. Like, Rhule has upped to the experience level on his staff with the addition of Holgorsen and Phil Snow 3, 4, 5-fold in the last month on the job. So one thing that Nebraska is not going to lack, and Rhule said that he felt at times during the 23 and first 2/3 of the 24 season that he didn't necessarily have the kind of sounding board that he felt like would be beneficial, and that Dana Holgorsen was a benefactor for him, was a benefit for him, and that Holgorsen was this sounding board kind of person because of his own head coaching experience. Well, Phil Snow at age 68 with his experience is absolutely a sounding board for Matt Rhule and for John Butler. Looking at Phil Snow's history and what he's coached, in addition to being a DC, and he was the DC at Temple and safeties coach. At Baylor, he was a walk-around DC and safeties coach in 2019, walk-around in 17 and 18. with the Panthers, just a defensive coordinator. Prior to that, he coached for the Detroit Lions as a linebackers coach. He coached for Washington in the NFL as a safeties coach, Washington in the NFL as a corners coach, UCLA as a safeties coach. So you can kind of see where this is going. Most of his experience is in the secondary, and I imagine he's going to be one of those coaches who's helping John Butler not just coordinate the defense, but work day to day with the guys on the back end of that defensive group.
I would think that all three of those guys will have a pretty big Rhule, Snow, and Butler will have a pretty big imprint on sort of what we see in the defense. Let's break here. We'll continue this conversation as we go on a Locked On Nebraska podcast.
Here we go.
All right, it's Tapper for the FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. FanDuel gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you're sitting there on a Sunday and you get the hunt right in the middle of the game, you could head to the FanDuel app right there. Check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play. It's so much more right on that same page where you place your bets. Also, plenty of other options on the FanDuel Sportsbook as well. Awesome place to visit. So head to FanDuel.com and join today. And once again, new customers, you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Sounds easy. Head to FanDuel.com and join today. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, welcome back. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you as we are reacting to some recent news within the last couple hours as John Butler will be elevated to the defensive coordinator position and other staff changes as well. By the way, this will, and a lot of these are sort of unconfirmed. There are different levels of confirmation and announcement and things like that. So bear with us a little bit on that. Mitch, you're the one who could speak to that the closest, obviously.
So yeah, Butler is in. He's the DC. The other Simpson is in as the outside linebackers coach on the defensive side. Obviously, we know that Holgorsen is in as the OC, Shorts is in as the receivers coach. And then the other two on the defensive side, they're working to get those finalized. And that would be Bradden, the D-line coach who's coming from the Kansas City Chiefs, and Phil Snow, who was most recently an analyst for the Chicago Bears, but more importantly, a longtime sidekick to Matt Rhule, coming as associate head coach. And we'll find out. We'll find out what other responsibilities Phil Snow has had. We've been talking about that here for the last few minutes on this show.
Yeah. All signs point to those things coming to fruition, though. Obviously, just have to, they'll announce them at some point, likely in the coming days. So that, back to sort of the start of this, that completes the staff, which is
does it?
Well, you can have a lot of assistants, as we know. I should say this: it completes the staff in sort of the way it was set up before, right? Like everyone that is left has been replaced, and more. So right. Nebraska has lost three coaches and added 4. Added Short, Simpson. You added a DC. I'm sorry, you didn't add a DC. You added Snow and Bradden. You added 4, and you lost 3. So that's all fine and good. The only number that matters is 10 that you can have on the road recruiting at one time. They can have 25 assistant coaches if they want to have 25 assistant coaches. 10 can go on the road and recruit, and that's not going to be a problem. And the 10 are not all going to come out of the guys who you see as position coaches or coordinators. We already know that Keith Williams and Jamar Mosey are maybe 1 and 1A as far as who's going to be on the road recruiting and doing work in recruiting. Did you see the news on Tuesday about Bill Belichick and his communications? He seems to be trending toward becoming the North Carolina coach, replacing Mac Brown. They're going from young, the opposite of young, to slightly less. I don't know. This is an interesting hire. One of the things that Bubba Cunningham, I think, said when when Mac was out was like, hey, we got to maybe get a little bit younger. Well, they
Like
they
6
will,
months.
yeah, but not by much. But I think I know where you're getting at. The idea is, like, so people will look at Bill Belichick and they'll say, Bill Belichick, you're going to coach college football? You're going to make it even harder on yourself? And the answer is no. He's basically making himself the head coach in the traditional football sense, if it is to be the case, and hiring an entire player personnel. He's hiring a front office.
Which is recruiting, right?
Yeah.
It's player personnel, it's evaluation, it's scouting, but
but
in college, the biggest job there is recruiting.
Mm-hmm. And he's going, and the idea is to, for those people to get the players and then funnel them to the coaches, and then the coaches coach them, and then that's in his mind, that's how it works.
I don't think Nebraska ever gets to that point, even as we see the staff grow and really no mind paid to the fact that if you lose a coach, you can hire 2 coaches. Why hire one when you can hire 2 for twice the price? I don't think Nebraska is going to get to the point where you won't have assistant coaches, on-field coaches who go out on the road and recruit, but you certainly won't have all of them. One of the things that Matt Rhule believes in, and that I think his general manager Sean Patton believes in, is that relationships begin in recruiting, and you want to develop relationships. The players that Nebraska recruits, Nebraska wants those players to develop relationships with the coaches who are going to coach them on the field. So if you have a staff that is entirely focused on recruiting, and then another staff that's entirely focused on coaching, they better be pretty interconnected. Otherwise, you're going to have kids coming to play for guys that didn't recruit them.
What if relationships don't matter anymore?
Okay. All right. Okay.
What if you decide,
truly the NFL?
Yeah. Like what if you decide, well, we could build all the relationships we want, and we could recruit this guy for 3 years, and he comes to our school and he leaves after a year. And we put all that into him, and we, like, there was no problems. We love him, but he left. And like, I could imagine that could be pretty, ground shaking, earth shattering for coaches. Like, this is a different thing. So I would imagine that some coaches out there are thinking, all right, well, we love relationships, and like, this is not Rhule. Definitely not his MO. But there has been a shift in how Rhule has talked about, the staff and personnel, and how you acquire personnel and all that stuff over the last couple of years, even since he's been here. So I don't know, like, maybe you make the decision one day, not saying Rhule will, that relationships, whatever, we can have other people recruit our players. They bring them in, we coach them, and it's a very transactional atmosphere.
That's very realistic. They're gonna hold on to relationship building for as long as it's feasible within college football, and at some point you're going to get to a level where this thing is so professionalized that it's only about the contract, and it's only about the opportunity to get to the next level. And a relationship is nice, but you don't hear a lot of NFL players talking about the relationships with their assistant coaches. It's just not a reality of the game at that level. I think it's more important for a 19-year-old kid. So many of these guys are going away. All of them are going away from home for the first time. Well, not the transfer portal players, but the high school players, when they sign with their first school, are going away from home for the first time. And at that stage of development, I think relationships are going to continue to be important. Where they're not as important is when players are coming out of the portal. And if you get to a stage where 30, 40, 50% of your team is built through the portal, and even Nebraska is not necessarily that far away from something along those lines. Some schools have zoomed right past it. Then relationships truly are not the number one thing, because you're only going to have a relationship with a player for a few days, maybe a couple of weeks at the most, before he comes and joins your program.
Yeah, food for thought. I don't feel like Nebraska's particularly close to that at this moment, given what the personalities that they have on their staff, and specifically their head coach. But I wouldn't be surprised. Like the Belichick thing, if that happens, that'll be an interesting case study. That's for sure, and it's a lesson as well.
Let's Let's dive a little bit into Terry Bradden, because he's the name here that came out of the blue. There was an expectation that John Butler might get the defensive coordinator job, if not now here in the first part of December, then after the Pinstripe Bowl on December 28th. Phil Snow, it's been kicked around. I think if Phil Snow, if the rules of college football were set today, in 2 years ago, were set 2 years ago as they are today, that Phil Snow might have been on Matt Rhule's original coaching staff. Him not having to go on the road and recruit and being able to just coach ball and not having to fit as one of a certain number under the umbrella, that all appeals much more, I would say, to somebody in his position than it did 2 years ago, than the situation did 2 years ago. But Terry Bradden, this came out of left field. So, and we'll be really interested to see where the connection formed, because there's a connection with everyone who ends up on Matt Rhule's staff. You know, Tony White, John Butler, they had connections to Nebraska and Matt Rhule before they were brought to Lincoln. Terry Bradden has been with the Chiefs for the last 8 years. This was his 4th season as the defensive line coach. All I know is that David Merritt is part of the Chiefs staff, and he's grown close with the Nebraska football program. We saw photos of him on the field on Sunday night with Dylan Raiola, with Isaiah Mosey, with Dawson Merritt, his son, who is coming to Nebraska. There's a connection there between the Chiefs, something of a connection there between the Chiefs and Nebraska football. It's exacerbated by the Nebraska quarterback who models parts of his game after the Chiefs quarterback. So I don't know. I don't know if Terry Bradden like folds into that whole dynamic or what it is, but I'll be interested to see. Like he's from Florida and coached in Daytona Beach, Florida. He coached at Florida Atlantic University. He's from Riviera Beach, Florida. He played quarterback at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and then Tuskegee University, which I believe is in Oklahoma. This will be interesting to find out what exactly it was that brought him from the NFL to the Big Ten.
Yeah, super interesting. That was the first connection that came off the top of my head too, with David Merritt. So maybe you hear it from enough people enough times, you're like, this guy's a really good coach, and you need a defensive line coach. Here you go. I always like the idea that quickly before we take a break here, that coaches, when they come in, and this has happened unfortunately a lot in Nebraska's history, where they've had to sort of reshuffle staffs and bring new guys in. Like who they connected to, right? Who have they coached? Who have they spent time around? Well, you're going to hear the name Chris Jones a lot. Bradden being an assistant defensive line coach for the Chiefs, working daily with a guy like Chris Jones could be most certainly a recruiting point.
That'll be like, it's like the new Hassan Reddick. How many times have you heard Matt Rhule bring up Hassan Reddick? He's a great ambassador and front man for everything that Matt Rhule has accomplished as a college coach and as an NFL coach, and getting to coach him with the Panthers too. Yeah, Chris Jones is a name you might hear when it comes to Terry Bradden and touting his credentials. All right. I mentioned a couple minutes ago, Connor, when you brought up that Nebraska's coaching staff was done, I kind of said, is it done? Let's talk about that a little bit after this break. All right, Mitch Sherman here to tell you about Omaha Steaks, because nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, you can skip the holiday hustle and bustle and save 50% off gourmet gifts site-wide at omahasteaks.com. And you'll get a $30 reward card when you shop early and use the promo code COLLEGE. With 5 generations of experience, Omaha Steaks consistently delivers the world's best steak experience. We know about that steak experience here in Nebraska. The rest of the country and the world is learning about it too. With the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks, you get easy ways to get the perfect gift through thoroughly curated gift packages that start at just $89.99. From legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts and more. Again, save 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com, and our listeners get an extra $30 off with the promo code college when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com. Use the promo code college. Minimum purchase may apply. All right, back with you for the final 5 minutes or so with the Locked On Nebraska pod here on a Tuesday evening. We are coming to react to breaking news. Mitch Sherman of The Athletic here with Connor Happer. Nebraska has a defensive coordinator. The interim tag is gone on John Butler. He will be coaching in the Pinstripe Bowl, his first game as the permanent Nebraska defensive coordinator, and he will be joined on the Nebraska side, it appears, trending in this direction, by Phil Snow as an associate head coach, seemingly to do some work with that defensive backfield where much of his history lies. And then Terry Bradden, the young 30-something Kansas City Chiefs assistant who will work with the defensive line. So Nebraska's replaced Tony White. Nebraska has replaced Terrence Knighton. Is Nebraska done? That's the question. Numbers-wise, it looks good. They're done. They're one heavy in comparison to the 2024 season. What about the offensive side, though? What might not be done on the offensive side? Do we think, and this is an open-ended question, I'm not saying that I know or have a great feeling either way, but do we think that Dana Holgorsen is set with what he's got? Running backs coach, E.J. Barthel, tight ends coach, Marcus Satterfield, quarterbacks coach, Glenn Thomas. We know he's set at wide receivers with the Keel Shorts. Is that the end? Are there some possible moves that might still happen on the offensive side?
My guess would be yes. And
offensive line coach Donovan Raiola.
That I can pretty much assure you that will be the case in 2025.
Yes. I knew I missed one.
He'll be back. Barthel at the run. I mean, Dana Holgorsen publicly called out the running backs various times. When he got here, and I don't that position has lacked the production it's needed over the last couple of years. That's for sure. And then you wonder about Ed Foley too. And then Satterfield, was, demoted, I guess, back to the, just tight ends coach. So maybe there's something there, or maybe that's a position where, hey, look around for another spot and stay here until you do. I don't think anything feels imminent to me, and maybe Nebraska keeps it as is for the bowl game, but there's a long time to the bowl game, so you don't know what's going to happen in the next few days.
As we know, these weeks can go by slowly. Sometimes 2 days feels like a month has passed, and with all that's happened just this week and going back to last week, you're covering a lot of ground. So you're right. Nebraska's going to travel to New York around December 23rd. So that's less than 2 weeks from now. Not going to make changes when they get on the ground in New York in bowl prep, but it's possible that something could happen still before then. I think a lot of people do wonder about that special team spot, and it's a legitimate question, something that Matt Rhule, I think will address here this month. And then, I think with Satterfield, he's going to stay at Nebraska if that's his best option.
Right.
But I mean, it's not the most comfortable thing. I mean, we have to be real about this. He was demoted after 12 games and then 9 games into another season. So I think if an opportunity presents itself, Nebraska might be in the market for a tight ends coach sometime this offseason. I'm surprised there's not been more discussed about Thomas, the quarterbacks coach. But it appears, at least on the surface here at the beginning, that Holgorsen and Thomas have a strong enough working relationship that that's something that can work. But I would also want to keep my eye on that one.
Yeah, I think I said this a couple of weeks ago, but it still feels sort of extra to me. It feels kind of like overkill, just given the offensive coordinator and the overlap with the quarterbacks like that.
They're so different in their background too.
I know. Yeah, it's really interesting. So yeah, that's one to watch. There's not a whole lot that's off the table, to be honest. I mean, I guess Donnie and
right.
The coaches that have already been shipped out and replaced. So yeah, there could be any combination of the things over the next couple of weeks.
What do you think Holgorsen's role I mean, he's not going to coach a position. He has background with quarterbacks. He has background with wide receivers. How does he spend his time in practices? Do you think he's with a position group? Do you think he spends a lot of time with the quarterbacks, or he's a holistic OC who goes equal spots around the field?
Yeah, anytime I've ever seen that actually operate, and we've seen a lot of we've seen a lot of offensive coordinators at Nebraska over the years now, and got a chance to see how kind of each of them operate. Like, it's usually OC standing right next to his quarterback, or the quarterbacks in practice. I don't think I've ever seen as too much roaming around, but Holgorsen approaches things a little bit different. Like I've said it before in this show, I think you could view him as the head coach of the offense, that kind of thing. So maybe that brings a little bit of a different light to it, but I would expect the involvement with the quarterback to be heavier than any other position by far.
Yeah. Which again, just kind of calls into question the role and responsibilities of Glenn Thomas as the quarterback's coach. So we'll see moving forward. It's pretty common for like a second round of staff changes to occur when you get into January and the NFL season's over, and some of these guys, of course, have NFL backgrounds, so they may have opportunities to do something there. Definitely something to watch. I'm with you. I don't think Nebraska's done. I think that there's more staff change to come. The majority of it has settled. The majority of the dust is settled, but there still are some small pieces to move around, I would expect. So, hey, we know that you've got questions about this stuff, and we're going to have a mailbag podcast that comes out on Thursday. So bring us your questions. Send them to our email at lockedonneb@gmail.com. You can hit us on Twitter with your questions, or just leave a comment in the YouTube comments section of this show, and we will get all of that stuff answered in our Thursday podcast. That's going to do it for this show on a Tuesday night, reacting to Nebraska's coaching moves in the middle of this transfer portal bowl prep roster reconstruction busy month of December. Thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, go check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Craig puts you first. He'll be talking about the college football playoff all month long, the 4 Big Ten teams that are set to play in the CFP. Find the Locked On Big Ten podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.